All right, it is 10:30, so we'll go ahead and get started on this webinar. For those of you who might have joined, sorry for those who I've introduced myself to multiple times. My name is Jessie Nance, and I am the Language Access Manager here at Ayuda. Joining me on our chat is Kendra Carson. She's our Outreach and Training Coordinator, and she'll be fielding all questions that might come up along the way. For those of you who have been to one of our provider trainings, this is just a refresher on the services that we provide, how to access those services, and eligibility criteria. We'll also be doing a Salesforce demonstration, which is the automated platform that we use to make all of your interpreter requests happen. So we'll go through all of that in the next 30 to 45 minutes. So just a quick agenda. The first part of this webinar is for both our Montgomery County and DC providers, for those of you who are providing services to MoCo and DC residents. And then at the end, since our providers that only work with DC residents receive additional services, those of you who only work with MoCo, you don't have to stay on for the second part of the webinar, and I'll let you know when we're going into the changing eligibility. So we're going to go over a quick background on the Community Legal Interpreter Bank. We're going to go over our Salesforce interpreter scheduling system, and quick best practices when working with an in-person interpreter. This is going to be a quick overview. We hope that our next webinar will be focused on best practices when working with an in-person interpreter. So just the objectives, we hope that you walk away understanding our policies and procedures, including the new web-based interpreter request system, which at this point is not as new, but might be new for some of you. And then understanding the different language services available to you all and when to use them. A little background on our bank. It was created for lawyers by lawyers, and this year we are celebrating our 10-year anniversary. It's a shared resource in the DC and expanding to the DMV area as a whole, taking advantage of the centralized expertise of language access experts in the area and also civil legal service providers here. As the number of limited English proficient residents grows in the district, we're just trying to find more solutions to ensure that folks are receiving access to justice in their native languages. We're serving as a national model and hoping to ensure equal access to justice for all. Just a reminder, we're going to go over a lot of instructions and the forms that you'll use to make requests. Those forms can always be found on our website. So if you go to Get Help, Language Access, and Civil Legal Service Providers, that's where you'll be able to find the instructions and forms we talk about today. We're also recording this webinar. We'll upload it to our website, and we'll also email it to you after this training. So if you have additional staff or interns who might be starting, feel free to share this with them. Just a quick overview of our funding, what our fiscal year looks like right now. We're currently, for our DC Bar Foundation funding, in the middle of fiscal year 2017, which is ending on December 31st, and starting back up with fiscal year 2018 on January 1st. So probably in November, December, you'll receive emails from us about signing new applications and MOUs for the fiscal year 2018. For our Montgomery County executive funding, we're in the middle of fiscal year 2018, which just started on July 1st. Thanks to all of you who got your updated apps and MOUs in. And as you know, funding right now, we don't have allocations for each of our organizations. It's just a as-you-need service for in-person interpretation, document translation, and telephonic interpretation. David Steib and I closely monitor our budgets on a monthly basis. If it gets to the end of a fiscal year and we're seeing that funds are becoming a little tighter, we generally will start to restrict spending on translations first. And, feel free to always send in translation requests. But if we see a way that we might be able to save a little money, or if it's not a client-specific document, we might ask you to push that off for another month or for the next fiscal year. But at this point, we're just business as usual. And here's just a quick overview of the prices. Obviously, your organizations don't see these prices, but just so you kind of have an idea of what each assignment looks like on our end. The translation, typically it's about $65 without a rush fee. And so that's why we really encourage folks to get in the request as soon as possible, just to keep those prices low. So right now we'd like to go over the 3 services that we're providing to you and your clients free of charge, thanks to our funding from the DC Bar Foundation, as well as the Montgomery County Executive. So for our Montgomery County and DC residents, we're able to provide in-person interpretation services, which most of you are familiar with. And that's, you'll be using Salesforce to make those requests. For our providers serving DC residents, and this is excluding Montgomery County now at this point, we also provide telephonic interpretation services, which includes video remote interpreting for our deaf and hard of hearing clients, and document translation services. So right now, we're going to go over what the process looks like to request an in-person interpreter. We use the platform of Salesforce, and within each organization, there's just one set of credentials for the entire organizations. This helps us to make sure that we're not putting in duplicate requests and that we're seeing all of the requests made from our organization in one place. So there's 2 options of how we've seen it at different providers. Some organizations just have one person who enters all requests for the organization. The other way that some organizations do it, if the capacity is a little bit bigger, they're able to share the username and password with everyone in the organization who might be making a request so that they can enter their own requests on their own time. So right now we're going to go in, pretend that we're an organization, one of our providers, and show you what it looks like to actually make the request on Salesforce. So I'm going to switch screens here. And I am logged in now. This is what your dashboards will look like. I'm logged in as our test interpreter and our test provider, and that's what you see up here, Echo Requester. But this is my dashboard. For those of you who have access to both our legal bank interpreters and our victim bank interpreters, you'll see the 2 different tabs up at the top. And the way that it looks like on your dashboard, your victim bank requests are going to show up first. So if you have, for example, at Ayuda, we have our legal service providers and our victim service providers on our social services team. Our social services team works up here on the active victim bank requests, and then the legal bank requests are here at the bottom. So for all of you today, we're going to be focusing on these legal bank requests. Now, if you're a provider that only has access to our legal interpreters, then you're only going to see legal bank requests. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and put it in the chat or follow up with us later. So to make your request, you're going to come up to the top and click Legal Bank Interpreter Request. And here's where you're going to put all of the information in that you have for your meeting with your client. We recommend that you have all of the information that you need when you make this request, because you can't save it and come back to it. So it's just kind of like a one-stop shop to put in your information, and then the request goes out. So here we're going to be putting in the requester's name. So I'm going to put myself in there and my email here at Ayuda, and then my phone number. Now, if you're the same person that's going to be the on-site contact person for the interpreter, you can easily just click this box and that information will autofill down to the bottom. Now, the next important thing is the language. So any language that we currently have legally trained interpreters for are going to be listed underneath this drop-down menu. So right now you'll see all of the different languages that we currently can provide legal interpretation for. If you don't see a language listed, please reach out to us. We're always trying to do more outreach and kind of feel out the needs of our providers of languages that we can't currently provide services in. So please reach out to us. I know we've had a lot of requests for Mom and different Indigenous dialects. So know that we are trying to do outreach to increase our bank. Now for today, I'm gonna go ahead and use Echo language. It's our tester language, so there won't be any real requests made. And so I've picked my language as Echo language. Now, if I want a specific gender, then I would be sure to mark that right here. We know a lot of you work with victims of trauma who might be more apt to working with female interpreters, so that is definitely an option here. Right now, male and female are the only genders that our interpreters identify as, so that's why those are the only ones that are listed here. We do caution that once you do choose a specific gender, that limits your pool of interpreters slightly. So when we run our reports and we see which jobs aren't being filled, it's generally the ones that are specific genders, especially female French. It seems like that is a request that is one of the tougher ones to fill. But if you have any concerns about that, you can always email us as you're putting the request in. So for this request, I'm just going to say none. And here, I don't have a specific interpreter that I would like to work with, so I'm going to leave this blank. Now, specific interpreter, if you're taking notes, this is a very important thing that we like to highlight. We really recommend that you only choose this option if you have spoken and made plans with that interpreter before you log into Salesforce to create your requests. So if you know that you want to work with interpreter Kendra and she's been working with your client on multiple cases, maybe as she's leaving a case and you know you have an assignment for the next Friday, you can confirm it in person with her there. You'll have each other's contact information from previous assignments, but we recommend making that confirmation in person before you come onto Salesforce and create that request. On the interpreter side, when they receive an email about an assignment, it doesn't look any different if they're requested specifically or not. So they don't know that you're only requesting them unless you have spoken with them beforehand. So just make sure that you're communicating with your interpreter if you want to make sure they're the ones that are working with you on your assignment. Here, do you want to exclude specific interpreter from being notified? If you have had an instance with a specific interpreter and they just don't really fit the needs of your assignment or your client, you have the option to add them to your excluded interpreter list. So they don't see anything weird on their end. They'll never know that you excluded them from your assignment, but it's just a way for you to be able to really choose an interpreter that's best fit for your case. And we do encourage you, if you do have any interesting situations that come up with our interpreters, to always reach out and let us know so that we can work to make sure that our interpreters remain of the highest quality. Here, if site translation is required, if you have, for example, an intake form or a questionnaire that they're going to be having to fill out, we ask that you mark this box. Some of our interpreters are not comfortable with doing any sort of site translation on site of the assignment. And we say if the document is over 2 pages, please submit it for a translation. So we can send it to one of our vendors, get the document translated for you, and then the client will have that in their language. Here, for total number of persons helped or impacted by this service, if it's just one client, you put one client down. If you're working with a CPO and it might be a mother and 2 children, you would change that number accordingly. For meeting date and time, you would just choose, we would say, I need an interpreter next Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning. If you have an alternative date that might work for you, you can put that in as well. And then here you're going to put the estimated meeting duration in minutes. So I think my meeting with my client will be 60 minutes, so I'm going to put that here. Now this is important not only for our interpreters so they know how long they can plan to be with you at your assignment, but if, for example, you have to cancel with less than 24 hours notice, what happens is we end up paying our interpreters for the estimated meeting duration. So if you put 180 minutes here, then we're going to be paying out our interpreters for those 3 hours that they had set aside previously. So just try to be as close to the amount of time as possible. Here you're going to list your client name. If it's an initial intake, you don't know their name, you can always put NA. You do have to fill this so that since it's a box in red, you do have to fill it. Date of birth, if you have it, that's helpful. Again, for the opposing party name, if you have it, that is helpful on the end of just having our interpreters do a conflict check. When interpreters go into the system to accept an assignment, they'll be able to see the client and the opposing party's name. Sometimes in smaller language communities, there might be a conflict. They might know the person, they might go to church with the person, is a situation that we've had come up. So we just like to make sure we take any preventative steps to make sure that once they arrive on site, they're ready to work. Here for your meeting type, you're just going to try it. You're going to select whatever type of meeting it is for you and your client, and you will put the street address of your assignment. When the request goes out to all of our interpreters, they don't see the actual assignment. They'll just get the nearest cross streets down here. The street address is actually only going to go out to that interpreter that accepts your assignment. For nearest cross streets, we recommend putting the closest metro station. That's an easy way for our interpreters to figure out where the assignment will be close to. And if you need to have specific details regarding the location, like walk down into the basement, just to make it as smooth as possible for your interpreters when they arrive. Short description of session, we recommend being as detailed as possible in this section. If it has to do with trauma or any sort of violence, sometimes our interpreters like to read through this to see what kind of case it is to make sure they're best suited for that. Also, it helps them kind of prepare with the type of vocabulary, any sort of specialized vocabulary they will need for that assignment. So I'll just say initial intake with client regarding asylum. Here, you'll see that we do ask some data questions for some of our funders. Are you offering this client services related to his or her being a victim of crime? This is just providing us match data for the funding that we get from the Office of Victim Services. Now here, is this client a resident of Montgomery County? This is where you're going to get your eligibility criteria. So if I select, yes, my client is a resident of Montgomery County, there's no additional information. So it'll let me make this request because I'm able to make requests on behalf of Montgomery County residents. If I say no, there's going to be additional questions that pop up just to ensure that we are able to provide services to your client. So the four options that come up are this client or applicant is a DC resident, they have a legal matter in DC, or this assignment is an intake or first meeting, and I'm not sure if they meet this eligibility criteria. So you could select any 3 of these. If you select none of the above, when you try to hit save, it will say that you will not be able to make that request just because of eligibility criteria. If you have any questions about eligibility, always feel free to reach out beforehand or as you're putting in the request. So I'll say that this client has a legal matter in DC, and then I go down to the bottom, that just for tracking purposes, if you can say what kind of legal case this is, that helps us report back as well. So we always recommend before you submit your request to make sure that you have entered in all of the correct information. Once you submit the request, you cannot actually edit the request. You would have to call Marilyn or myself or send us an email at interpreterbank@ayuda.com for us to go in and make the necessary changes. So to try to avoid any of those issues, we just say, make that check as you're going through and then hit save. Upon completion of submitting the request, you will see this page pop up. It's just another chance for you to be able to check that you've entered in all of the correct information. You can either download this if that would help you, or if you're going to give it to another attorney or staff member at your organization, or you can go back to your dashboard. And here, I will go down to active legal bank requests, and I should see the request that I've made. So this is the request that I made on August 28th at 10 a.m. So here are your active legal bank requests. Once you log into your dashboard, you can check the status, and I see this one is pending, which means none of my interpreters have picked it up yet. If it's a covered assignment, that means that an interpreter has picked it up and you would have received a confirmation email. And then all of your completed legal bank requests will end up going down here to the second part of your dashboard. So this is another way to check to make sure, oh, I want to make sure that I didn't put in the same request as my colleague. I know we chatted about it yesterday. This is a way to make sure that you are only putting in one request per assignment. So that is Salesforce and what you'll see on your dashboard. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint, and I'll be able to show you what happens after you submit a request. So we've gone through Salesforce, entered our request. This is the type of availability email that our interpreters receive. So you'll see that your name would pop up here from the legal service provider, tells all of that information, and then if they want to accept the assignment, they just go into their own account. They have their own dashboard on Salesforce, and they're able to accept the assignment. Once they log in, that's where they're doing that conflict check, the information that you provided based on client's name and date of birth. And so they're able to do the conflict check beforehand. Once an interpreter accepts the request, then both you and the interpreter and Interpreter Bank will receive this confirmation email. So it'll confirm the interpretation assignment, it'll give the date and the time, the address, the specific details you put in about where to find the actual building. And here's the important part. You will be given your interpreter's phone number, and obviously their email will be looped into here as well. If you want to be in contact with them beforehand, just say, hey, it might be helpful if we have a 15-minute pre-session just to go over so I can give you some more background on the assignment. You can feel free to send them an email or give them a call. If in the unfortunate circumstance that one of our interpreters has to cancel an assignment, this is what would happen if you canceled the assignment. Our interpreters would receive this email and they would know that the assignment is no longer occurring. With cancellations, you need to cancel assignments as soon as possible. If they're canceled within 24 hours of the requested time, we are, per the contracts that we have with our interpreters, we do pay them for that estimated meeting duration. And so if it's 60 minutes, we'll pay them for that 1 hour. So this is just a way to keep funds alive and being in the community, but we do understand that there are certain cases that sometimes you just have to cancel last minute. But make sure you log on to Salesforce to cancel your assignment. So just some reminders of what we just went over for that in-person interpreter requests. Make sure you're using the correct tab for submitting requests. So just like we saw, you're either going to be submitting a request on behalf of a victims bank client or a legal bank client. And you can check your requests under active legal bank requests. Only use the specific interpreter feature if you have already confirmed the date and time with that interpreter. We unfortunately see many cases, and we're trying to reduce this, where the interpreter doesn't accept the assignment, and if an interpreter doesn't accept an assignment, in this case, no other interpreters are receiving that notification. So it's only going out to one person. If they don't accept it, you're not going to get that assignment filled. When you're providing a short description of session, make sure you're describing the type of legal case and any special requests. We're super excited. We just recently purchased a set of simultaneous interpretation equipment. At this time, we have 25 receivers for clients and 2 transmitters, meaning that we can facilitate up to 2 different languages at the same time. So if you know that your session is short on time and you need 45 minutes and you only have 45 minutes and simultaneous equipment would be more appropriate, just make sure you list that in the short description of session. Not all of our interpreters are trained in simultaneous, so this also helps them understand what kind of assignment they're going to be accepting. If you are needing an American Sign Language interpreter, make sure that you know that the system is not going to allow you to choose a specific interpreter. ASL and CDI cases, which are cases with certified deaf interpreters, are just a little harder to fill because a lot of them require team interpreting. So the system is not allowing you to choose specific interpreters to increase the likelihood that you will get your assignment filled. In addition, if you are using, if you have an ASL assignment, you might receive multiple confirmation emails because there are multiple interpreters assigned to that assignment. Similarly to that, if you are requesting multiple interpreters for, let's say, a clinic or a Know Your Rights training, you will receive multiple confirmation emails, so you get the information for all of the interpreters that are going to be present. And when thinking about eligibility, is my client going to be able to receive language access services? They must fall into one of these 4 categories. They must be a Montgomery County resident, a DC resident, have a legal matter in DC, or they're new to your organization and you're not sure yet if one of the 3 categories applies to the client. Some key updates from our end. We work really hard to make sure that our deaf and hard of hearing clients receive the same type of language access. So there are a limited number of ASL interpreters in the area, and a lot of them work full-time, so it's harder for us to fill these assignments. So we have specialized training available for our ASL interpreters as well as our other legal bank interpreters through the Language of Justice. We make sure that all of our interpreters go through this 3-day training to understand attorney-client privilege, unauthorized practice of law, and best practices when working in out-of-court legal settings. Now, we realized that we weren't able to fill a lot of our ASL assignments just based on the interpreters that we had in those trainings. So we've waived in interpreters who have a specialized certificate legal, which is very similar to our Language of Justice training. We've waived in interpreters who have taken foundations of legal interpreting, and we're currently contracting with an outside vendor, TCS, whose interpreters all are legally trained. At this time, we have 18 ASL interpreters and 5 certified deaf interpreters. So these assignments can be a little trickier to fill. So we recommend putting them in with at least 2 weeks notice just to get into the interpreter schedules. And if you have any questions about making these types of requests, you can always email interpreterbank@ayuda.com. Marilyn is our maven for making sure that these assignments get filled. Now, you might have a question on when you would be using a certified deaf interpreter. So, certified deaf interpreters are deaf individuals who are able to bridge any sort of language gaps that might exist between your client and an American Sign Language interpreter. So, you would use a certified deaf interpreter if your client advocates for themselves that they think it would be best to use one. You might also think about using a CDI if your client is a deaf youth, if they are developmentally or physically impaired, if they were born in another country and might have learned a sign language based on their home country, or if they're a victim in a state of trauma. The interpreting process can be overwhelming, especially in some of the legal settings that you all work within. So having a certified deaf interpreter is just another way to ease that language gap and ensure that language access is provided at the highest standard. Again, if you have any questions on whether or not you should be using a CDI, you can always email us and we can help walk through that process. Now, we are going to go into the telephonic interpretation services we provide. So if you are a provider that only serves Montgomery County residents, the rest of this training will not apply to your work. So you are free to leave, but the rest of you, I encourage you to stay on as we're going to go through telephonic and document translation. So if you have a limited English proficient or no English proficient person come to your office, we recommend that you either use a bilingual staff member or language line to communicate. If you do not know what language the person speaks, Language Line provides us posters and desktop displays to use in your office so that the person that walks into your office can point to their language. If the person does not have access to read the poster, or if you don't have the display, you can always call Language Line and press 0 to reach an agent. Once you've pressed 0 and you're connected to Language Line, they can assist you in determining the language being spoken. When a deaf or hard of hearing person comes to your office, you can try to communicate with written notes, but there are some instances when the person might not be able to read written language. Some deaf people can read lips, and you might be able to communicate with them in that fashion. And you can also consider using video relay interpreting to communicate with them. So it's basically the same services as Language Line. You have to have one computer in your organization set up with the software, and you can access live video interpreters instantly. So that's another option that you have in these instances. We understand that a lot of our providers use pro bono attorneys. So if you're referring a case to a pro bono attorney and the client needs interpretation, you can let the pro bono attorney know that the bank is available to use by private firms working on pro bono matters for a fee. So we have a special section on our website for firms where they can learn about signing service agreements, and we are happy to explain our services to firms. But we also understand that there are cases where the pro bono attorney just doesn't understand the necessity sometimes for using trained interpreters and might have bilingual staff in their office. If language access is impeding their access to justice and you still need to use our bank with your pro bono attorneys, that's always an option. So we don't want this to ever get in the way of a client receiving services in their language, but we do try to encourage firms to sign service agreements with us to ensure that they have access to the highly trained interpreters that we provide to our providers. Now, when you do have an assignment with an interpreter, your interpreter should bring this form with them. This form is also located on our website. It's just the way that we verify the hours that they were working with you. So make sure that you sign this form before they leave your office. Otherwise, there's a back and forth email chain that you would have to complete so that we're able to confirm the time that they worked with you. So all you'll have to do is sign this part at the bottom, just your point of contact name, signature, and the end time of assignment. So just to recap what we went over, log into Salesforce to make your requests. You can keep track of your assignments on your dashboard and through confirmation emails. Be sure not to duplicate requests and submit requests with plenty of advance notice. We recommend a week for spoken languages and up to 2 weeks for ASL or CDI assignments. If you are putting in a request for an ASL assignment, we do require that you put in an alternative date and time. If you have that on hand for spoken assignments, that works and is really helpful so that we're able to go through the scheduling nightmare if we can't find interpreters. And I'll just go over their interpreter evaluations. If you have a great assignment with an interpreter, we encourage you to write back to us and provide us a client story or just quick feedback on that interpreter. It helps us go back to the DC Bar Foundation to show the work that our interpreters are doing within the community. And just make sure that you're signing that point of contact signature form when your interpreters leave your office. So this would be the time for question and answer. So just make sure you are using that chat box if any questions came up, or you can save them for later and send us an email afterwards. So we're going to go into accessing over the phone interpretation services. So we use a language line as our vendor to respond to requests that we aren't able to fill with in-person interpreters. So for our legal interpreter bank, you will be dialing these numbers, and we are going to provide this information in a follow-up email. In addition, your organization has unique client codes and access codes, so someone within your organization should be able to provide that to you. If you can't find it and need it, just feel free to give us a call or email. So you'd be dialing this number, and then everyone will enter this 6-digit code. This just lets them know that this is a legal bank assignment and determines which eligibility questions that they're going to be asking you beforehand. You'll indicate the language you need, or you'll press 0 for agent assistance if you don't know the language and need their help in identifying the language that your client is speaking. And then you'll provide your 3-digit access code specific to your organization. The data that they're going to ask you for is just that same data that we found on Salesforce. Is your client a DC resident? If it's regarding a DC legal matter, is it the first call on the legal matter, or how many people are impacted by how many people are impacted by this service? As soon as you've answered this question, you'll be connected to your interpreter. We highly recommend that you document the name and the ID number of the interpreter for reference. Before you connect with your client, you can brief the interpreter and give them any special instructions. You can say, this client walked in, this is the kind of intake services that we offer. I just want to know what kind of help they're seeking today. If somebody calls your office, you can also connect them using conference calling, and the language line representatives can place the 3-way call for you, which is very helpful. For video and remote interpreting, you have instant access to video interpreters available in American Sign Language. They're all nationally certified. They might not be legally certified, and that is the same for our language line telephonic interpreters. And most of the situations that we hear are really high quality, but they're not as trained as some of our interpreters are within the bank. So that's just something to keep in mind. When you're using VRI, you do have to download a specific software, and that system can be configured on different devices. So it can be on a phone, a computer, a tablet, and you can install the app on up to 10 devices. And you just have to be connected on some sort of internet connection. If you have to install the system for the first time, you can always reach out to us here or Joe Matthews at languageline.com. He's our account executive, and he's able to walk you through that process. It's a pretty easy download. Here's the URL for it. We'll also be sending this in the PowerPoint that we send as we follow up, so you'll have access to this later. And this is just a quick rundown of what that looks like. You'll log into your PC with your username and password, and then you'll select the language that is needed, and then the interpreter will appear on the screen. And the same thing, we recommend that you document their name and their ID number. There are certain cases where we've had providers or clients complain about the quality of service with LanguageLine. We always report back to Joe Matthews, our account executive, so feel free to email him directly and copy us on that email so we're aware of any issues that come up. You're going to want to be able to provide your client ID and access code, which someone in your organization has, the date and time of the incident, that interpreter number that hopefully you took down at the beginning of the call, and as much detail about the incident as possible. So that wraps up our telephonic interpretation services part. Again, if you have any questions, Kendra is here, ready and eager to answer anything that might have come up. And our final part that we're going to go over right now are document translation services. This is the only thing that is not automated at this point. So you will have to go onto our website and the Community Legal Interpreter Bank page to submit a translation request form. This is a fillable PDF that you'll find on our website, and you're just going to put in as much information as possible. Again, you'll see that there are eligibility criteria that we have to meet, but you have additional options, as you'll see, that it might be organizational forms that are used with clients who are DC residents or DC case matters. So this might be intake forms or any sort of office-wide material that would benefit the limited English proficient folks that come into your office. You can also submit requests for outreach purposes. So if you have clinics that are coming up and you want to translate your flyer into multiple languages, we can also do that with this funding. You're going to need to put the date that the translation is needed. If it's less than 24 hours notice, we generally incur pretty steep rush fees, so we just recommend putting these in as quick as possible. And you'll put the kind of service you need, if it's just a translation, revision, editing, and the type of format and the type of legal case. Here at the bottom, if you're going to immigration court, many times they need a certificate of translation, so make sure you mark that off if that's something you'll be needing. The procedure is also listed in much more detail on this form that you'll find on our website as well. As soon as you have that fillable PDF filled out, you'll send it to interpreterbank@ayuda.com. And make sure you have the correct documents attached to the translation request. We always submit this to two of our vendors to try to get the most competitive quote to keep our prices low and our funding readily available. So make sure that you are checking your email. Many of these quotes expire within a certain amount of time. So just to make sure that we are able to move the process along, make sure that you're checking your email once you do submit a document translation request. You should, the turnaround time is pretty quick, so many times our providers will get the documents before the date that they needed, but just make sure that you are paying attention to those rush fees. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, there might be a time in our fiscal year that we are running a little tight on funds. This generally happens in the last 2 months. So what we'll do is we'll check documents and we'll be a little bit more conservative with that spending. So if it's not client specific, we might ask you to hold off for the next fiscal year. If it's something that might have already been translated and you're just updating a certain piece or a certain section, we might ask you to just highlight the sections that you need that are pertinent to the updated case. We always recommend, if it's something that the courts might be able to translate, to go through them as well. So you can always contact the Office of Court Interpreting, and that's same for government translations as well. And this just helps us be conservative with our spending and make sure that our dollars reach as many clients as possible. And that is the end of the translation services piece as well. So we are going to go ahead and wrap up here. It's been 45 minutes, so I want to make sure that we're respecting your time. This was just a quick overview of the services we provide. If you or anybody within your organization wants to have a more detailed training, you can always reach out to us. Our language access program actually just moved downtown, so we're a lot closer to a lot of our legal service providers. So we're happy to come out to you, meet your staff, and provide more in-depth training. We also are going to be carrying out a series of webinars over the next few months, and those topics are going to include best practices when working with interpreters, any updates that we might have from our funders, how to capture good client stories, and the importance of those when we are going back for our funding with the DC Bar Foundation. But if you have any recommendations or any suggestions of other webinars that we might be able to hold, we are welcoming any ideas. We're excited to have this new method of communicating and reaching all of our providers. So we'll stay on for another 4 or 5 minutes if you want to use the chat box, or feel free to send us an email. My email is just Jessie, Jessie, at ayuda.com. We're happy to answer any questions and just appreciate you being here and for using our services. Have a great rest of your day.